Page 48. Continuation of answer to question 52. He makes a haughty show of kingship, although he knows his own weakness. He smarts under a sense of helplessness. Quote, "But what are kings when regiment is gone, but perfect shadows in a sunshine day?" Unquote. Act 5, Scene 1, lines 26-27. Marlowe suggests a theme of conflict between Edward's wishes as a private man and his duties as a monarch. But he has not been able to stage this contest in the theatre of Edward's soul. He does not fight his mind. He is not convulsed by opposing impulses or moods. There is not even heart-searching, self-lacerating, luxuriating in reverie that we find in Macbeth. Macbeth pulls himself up for a moment with a sharp sense of remorse and then lapsing back again into a desperate impulse. In Hamlet, there is the seesaw between extremes of energy and extremes of lethargy. But there is no such thing in Edward II. He only expresses his helplessness as a king. Like a weak child, he laments that Gaveston is weaned away from him. He cannot pull himself up in a furious rage, nor does he utter the awful cries of despondency. This absence of inner conflict explains why Edward II is not a tragic hero. Towards the end of the play, his drowsy mood of resignation only stirs pity. His fall does not inspire the audience with that sense of glory and dignity which the tragic heroes produce by their heroic resistance against fate. He does not show the greatness of spirit which tragic heroes display in their heroic resistance to fate in their final recovery from folly or illusion. Edward's foolish fondness for Gaveston and then Spencer antagonizes the nobles and his wife and makes him indifferent to his duties as a king. This is his tragic trait, which leads him to his ultimate disaster and death. Edward II pines for love and friendship. He cannot remain alone. He longs for the comforting companionship of a friend. This longing for friendship is a Renaissance characteristic, and Marlowe uses it for showing the tragedy of Edward. His wife does not offer him the understanding companionship. So it is a tragedy brought about by Edward's excessive longing for friendship and the love of a friend. This theme of friendship was a very favorite one with Renaissance writers. Marlowe got the theme from the classical legends to which he refers on and off. Question 53. Discuss with special reference to Edward II the absence of inner conflict in Marlowe's tragic hero. Answer. See answer to question 52. Question 54. How does Marlowe present in Edward II the conflict between the king's wishes as a man and his duties as a monarch? Answer. See answer to question number 52. Question 55. Edward II is a tragedy on the theme of love and friendship. Discuss. Answer. See answer to question number 52 from third paragraph onwards. Question number 56. Comment on use of imagery and handling of blank verse in Edward II. Answer. Marlowe gave the approval of his authority on the blank verse of the classical school and put aside the old rhyming lives of the lines of the native drama. Quote, "Jigging Venus of rhyming mother with," unquote, as he says in the prologue to Tamburlaine. He found the blank verse of the classical models wooden, stilted, and lifeless, and took upon himself the task to breathe life and passion into it and, quote, make it an instrument of 100 stops, unquote, with its infinite variety. The old blank verse consisted of lines each ending with an unaccented syllable, standing by itself and monotonous in rhyming effect. Page 49. He varied the rhythmic pauses, altered the accents, and made the meter suit the subject. Thus, the language of the drama was brought nearer to life. In Tamburlaine, the verse was, quote, mighty, unquote, suiting the subject of the magnificent passion of conquest. In Dr. Faustus, the verse was mellowed and even conversational. It expresses the aspirations of a scholar. Edward II is a historical play in which sympathies have been distributed over a vast cast of characters. In spite of poetic fervour, verse has been made suitable and flexible to meet the demands of the characters who speak it. See answer to question 15. From Marlowe is essentially a poet. Question 57. Question 57. Discuss how Marlowe deals with the question of governance in Edward II, CU paper 2003. Answer. See answer to question number 36. Question 58. It is possible to say that England is the central protagonist of Edward II. Justify your answer. Justify your answer. Answer. See answer to question 20. Explanations. 1. What need the article people love starlight, to whom the sun shines both the day and night? Act 1, Scene 1. Recalled by Edward from his Gascon home in France, Gaveston appears on a street of London on his way to the court. He reads Edward's letter, in which the king asks Gaveston to come to London to, quote, share the kingdom with thy dearest friend, unquote. He says that he has come back to London, which, quote, harbours him I hold so dear, unquote. He will care neither for, quote, lordly peers, unquote, nor for the base multitude. He is ready to be at enmity with the world if he can find the opportunity to lie upon the bosom of the king. Why should he care for the starlight of the affection of peers or multitude when he can enjoy the sunshine of the king's countenance? In the polar region, the sun shines continually for 3 months, so the people in this region enjoy the sunshine day and night. So Gaveston enjoys the favour and love of the king, who is like the sun. He therefore does not care for the favour of the peers and ordinary men, who are lesser luminaries like stars. Notes. What, why, the Latin quid, Q-U-I-D. Arctic people is people in the polar region. Starlight is the light of the stars at night. 2. Therefore I'll have Italian masks by night, shall with their goat feet dance the antic hay. Act 1, Scene 1. Edward II has sent a letter to Gaveston, his favourite, on his accession to the throne, recalling Gaveston to London. Gaveston appears in the street in London on his way to the King's Court. In these lines, he says in a soliloquy what he will do for the pleasure and entertainment of the sensuous king. He maintains that the king is a lover of music and poetry. He will therefore arrange a surfeit of these for entertaining the king. He will make arrangements for the musical plays of Italy at night and also for comedies, elocutions and pageants. He will do something more for the gratification of the sensuous king. He will make his boy servants dress like the lovely female figures of wood nymphs. They will surprise and delight the king as he walks in the wooded countryside. Page 50. He will dress his servants in such attires as to represent them as the sensual goat-footed deities of the forest, treading the green fields as if in a forest. He will instruct them to dance a wanton country dance. All these he will arrange for satisfying the king's desire for sensuous pleasure. These lines emphasize the king's character and disposition. He is a lover of pleasures. He is more interested in the sensuous pleasures and entertainments than in the duties of kingship. As a result, there is conflict in him between his desires as private man and his duties as a king. This aspect of the king has the substance of the drama. But Marlowe could not engage his attention on this aspect and render it into gripping drama. This passage is an illustration rather of the poet's own time than of the reign of Edward II. Quote, "The foreign influence and foreign manners of which jealousy was then felt were French and Provençal rather than Italian." Unquote. It was in the Elizabethan age that the Italian influence was prominent. Masque and other entertainments became popular in England during this time. This Italian influence was, however, disliked by the cultured section. Shakespeare satirizes Jacques, who imitates the Italian manners. Hence, here is an anachronism. Anachronism. Marlowe makes Gaveston and Edward refined in their tastes and interest. In history, they are given to coarse pleasures and, quote, vile, naughty ribaldry, R-E-B-A-U-L-D-R-Y, unquote. Classical references in the lines also attest the Renaissance influence. Notes: Italian masks were short plays. Italian masks. Masks were short plays in dumb shows or brief dialogues. Characters wore masks befitting the parts they represented, chiefly of gods, goddesses, and other imaginary beings. It originated in Italy and came to England under the influence of the Renaissance. Sylvan nymphs, female deities of the forest. Satyrs, sylvan deities represented as part females and part goats. They stand for sensual nature. Antique, an old-fashioned dance of the countryside with wanton movements. 3. Not Hylas was more mourned of Hercules than thou hast been of me since my exile. Act 1, Scene 1. These lines occur in the opening scene of Marlowe's Edward II. Gaveston overhears the angry conversation between the king and his barons. He is pleased to hear that the king would not brook the haughty menaces of the barons and is determined to put down the rebellious barons. The king has taken a solemn pledge that either he would die or live with Gaveston. Gaveston is so delighted to hear these flattering words of the king that he can no longer conceal himself. He comes forward and greets the king. The king embraces him in rapturous joy at the sight of Gaveston. He calls himself in ecstasy of joy another Gaveston, meaning that Gaveston is his another self. He refers to the classical story of love between Hercules and Hylas. Hylas, Hylas, was a beautiful youth, and Hercules, by killing his father, took him as his favorite. Hylas accompanied Hercules in his Argonautic expedition for his golden fleece. He was carried away by the water nymphs when he went to draw water from a well on the shore of Mysia, Mysia. Hercules was overwhelmed with sorrow at the loss of his favorite and searched for him in vain. Edward compares his condition at the loss of Gaveston when he was an exile to that of Hercules searching in vain for his favorite Hylas. Edward suffered acute misery at the loss of Gaveston. Page 51. In this exaggerated expression of grief, there is, however, truth. The love of Edward for Gaveston is genuine and sincere. The classical parallel is very appropriate and aptly describes the feelings of the king. The reference shows the influence of the Renaissance, which opened the floodgate of classical scholarship. But it does not befit the mouth of Edward II. 4. King Edward, who's there? Convey this priest to the Tower. Bishop of Coventry. True, true. Act 1, Scene 1. Edward II is in rapturous joy at the return of Gaveston after a long exile. He heaps honours on him. He expresses his great happiness at the opportunity of honouring Gaveston. He is ready to give him everything that belongs to him as a king. He is even prepared to give him his seal in order to authorize him to command and condemn what his mind desires. At this moment, the Bishop of Coventry passes that way for celebrating the burial of Edward I. He expresses surprise at the return of wicked Gaveston. The king and Gaveston grossly insult him as he was, quote, the only cause of his exile, unquote. The king hands over the bishop to Gaveston in order to deal with him as he pleases. He asks the attendants to drag the bishop to the Tower. He uses the word, quote, convey, unquote. He certainly means by this word, carry. But convey within quotes has a secondary meaning, quote, steal, unquote. The bishop in bitter sarcasm remarks that, quote, convey within quotes is the right word for the proceeding, like the one which the king does with the bishop. Marlowe, like Shakespeare and other Elizabethan dramatists, was fond of using puns for joke, sarcasm, and self-pity. John of Gaunt, in Richard II, puns on himself in bitter self-pity. John of Gaunt indeed, and Gaunt in dying old, unquote. Notes. Convey. Briggs, in his edition of Edward II, brings out the sarcasm in the word convey. Convey has a double meaning. To convey, was a good Elizabethan slang for to steal. In Richard II, Shakespeare makes use of the same punning sarcasm. When Bolingbroke orders his attendants, within quotes, to convey Richard to the Tower, the latter remarks in sarcasm, quote, "Oh good, convey, conveyors are you all," unquote. 5. Ere my sweet Gavestons shall part from me, this isle shall fleet upon the ocean, and wander to the unfrequented Inde. And wander to the unfrequented Inde, I-N-D-E. Act 1, Scene 4. The barons and the Archbishop of Canterbury sit in council at the new temple. They pass a resolution of Gaveston's exile and sign it. When the king and Gaveston enter, they cast insulting words at them. They wonder why the king should dote upon the, quote, ignoble vassal, unquote. The king gets angry at the insolence of the barons, but the king's anger is of no avails. At the direction of Lancaster, the barons remove Kent and Gaveston. King Edward gets very much aggrieved and aggravated at the humiliation of Gaveston and the insolence of the barons. In his impotent rage, he declares that his sweet Gaveston shall not be separated from him. Ere his sweet Gaveston is snatched away from him, the island of England shall float upon the ocean and move towards India, which is still unknown and untrodden by the people. The reference to India by Edward implies a knowledge of the passage to India, which is an anachronism in the mouth of Edward. The allusion is suitable to the poet's own time in which adventure was so popular. Spenser in Faerie Queene says, Act 2, Scene 6, lines 2, she wandered from one to other Y-U-D. This line is within quotation. Page 52. 6. Proud Rome, that hatchest such imperial grooms, and banks raised higher with their sepulchres. Act 1, Scene 4. This is from King Edward's soliloquy in Scene 4, Act 1, after he has been forced by the barons and the Archbishop of Canterbury to sign their resolution to banish Gaveston. The Archbishop, who is the Pope's legate in England, threatens to bring religious punishment upon the king if he would not sign the resolution. Edward in helpless anger addresses the Pope, who from Rome rules over the Christian world by the help of subordinate servants and enforce obedience by threats. In his fury, he defies the authority of Pope and curses the establishments of Pope so many centers of irreligion and oppression. He takes a solemn oath to bring these buildings low to the ground by using his authority against the Pope. He will kill the priests even in Italy and make the river Tiber swell with the dead bodies of the priests. Their graves will raise the banks of the Tiber to a great height. The anti-papal character of the speech is worth noting. The spirit of defiance in the speech is more suitable in Elizabethan age than in Edward's time. The passage is an instance of anachronism. The speech, however, highlights the importance of the king. Notes: Proud Rome. The address is directed to the all-powerful Pope of Rome. Taper lights, candle lights which burn before the church altar at the time of religious service. Anti-Christian, against the spirit of Christianity. 7. O miserable and distressed queen, the cup of Hymen had been full of poison. Act 1, Scene 4. These lines are uttered by Queen Isabella in agony of shame and humiliation. The king and Gaveston insult her. The king tells her that unless somehow his dear Gaveston be recalled, the queen must not come in his sight. When the king leaves the queen, she indulges in lamentation about her lot. She describes herself as a distressed woman. In her misery, she recalls the day on which, after her marriage with Edward, she had left France on board the royal ship. She now wishes that she had been changed into some rock by the enchantress Circe, as she metamorphosed the monster Scylla, Scylla, by her powerful magic. She walked on the waves as she cast a spell on Scylla, a terrible monster woman. She also wishes that she could have drunk the cup of poison on the marriage day instead of drinking the cup of wine. In short, she wishes that he would have died earlier in order to save herself the disgrace and humiliation at the hand of her husband. The passage shows Marlowe's fondness for classical allusions. This is the result of the influence of the Renaissance, which stirred up the imagination of the writers. They became interested in the fables and myths of classical literature of Greece. Notes: Circe, Circe, an enchantress first mentioned by Homer. She dwelt in an island in the Mediterranean. Walking on the waves. This has reference to a story in Ovid's Metamorphoses. Scylla was a terrible monster. Circe walked on the waves as she went to cast a spell on Scylla. She was changed into a rock by Circe. Hymen, classical god of wine. Cup of wine means the wine drunk at the marriage feast by the bride. 8. Like frantic Juno will I feel the earth, so much as he on cursed Gaveston. Act 1, Scene 4. Page 53. This is from the heart-rending lamentation of Queen Isabella over her sad lot of disgrace and humiliation at the hand of her husband Edward II. She is indeed an unfortunate woman who did not have any love of her dear husband, the king. She wishes that she died on the marriage day in order to spare herself the shame and humiliation of the neglect and rejection by her husband. Now she is cursed with the lot of lamenting her husband's neglect like jealous Juno, the queen of Zeus. Zeus, the supreme god of heaven, doted on Ganymede, his cupbearer, and was neglectful of his queen. Isabella is also neglected and abandoned by her husband Edward, who is infatuated with Gaveston, his favourite. According to Isabella, Edward dotes on Gaveston more than Zeus had doted on Ganymede. The passage is full of classical allusions which show the influence of the Renaissance on the writers of the Elizabethan age. Notes: Jove, Zeus, the supreme god of heaven. Ganymede, a handsome young man, son of Tros, Tros, or according to later writers, son of Ilus, Ilus. He was carried off to heaven to serve as cupbearer and Zeus was infatuated with him. Juno, the queen of Zeus, became jealous and frantic. 9. Fair queen, forbear to angle for the fish that now I hope floats on the Irish seas. Act 1, Scene 4. Isabella appeals to the barons to recall Gaveston. She wishes the recall of Gaveston, not for the sake of Gaveston, but for her own sake, because the repeal of Gaveston will please the king and will make him care for her. Younger Mortimer points out that if Gaveston is recalled and restored to the king, he will again be infatuated with him and will neglect the queen. Thus, by her effort to bring back Gaveston, the unfortunate queen is inviting misery upon herself. Mortimer calls Gaveston a dangerous fish torpedo or electric ray. This fish has the power to give electric shock to anyone touching it. The vile favourite of the king, Gaveston, is such an electric fish. He will catch the queen dead when she will take him back. Mortimer wishes that the vicious Gaveston would die in a shipwreck while crossing over to Ireland and will float on the Irish seas. Notes: torpedo. Marlowe takes it from Pliny, who describes this fish in his Natural History. That's the name of a book. Marlowe is a great scholar. His imagination also luxuriates in the strange world of fancy. 10. My heart is an anvil unto sorrow, when I was forced to leave my Gaveston. Act 1, Scene 4. Gaveston is banished for the second time. The king sees him off and returns disconsolate to the place where the queen and the barons are talking. He laments to himself the loss of his favourite. The king waxes poetic and imaginative under the impact of sorrow. He draws imageries from classical legends. He compares his heart to the anvil upon which sorrow strikes hard. It strikes as hard as the hammers of the smiths working under Vulcan, the blacksmith of gods. The hard, cruel strokes of sorrow confuse his brain and make him mad. He is more madly longing for Gaveston. Edward, in his frenzy of grief, is a romantic hero expressing his grief-stricken heart in the eloquent language of imagery. The imageries are taken from Greek legends and fables. This shows the influence of the Renaissance of Marlowe. Marlowe is deeply read in classical love, and his romantic mind feeds on classical fables.